Day 2, Live Q&A. Theme, Design, User Research, and User Experience. A11y Camp 2021. We'd like to thank our gold sponsors Telstra and Intopia, our silver sponsors ANZ and Coles, and our bronze sponsor How2.
Welcome to our second live Q&A session with our presenters. Let me start by acknowledging that I am hosting this event from the lands of the Darug people. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you're all joining us today for A11y Camp, and also to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in the event. I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. So thank you all very much for joining us today. Some of you may be on the live Q&A yesterday, so apologies. You might get a little bit of the same information about A11y Camp and how we're going to run, but very soon we will get into the live Q&A. So I'm Sarah. I'm one of the founders of A11y, and so usually I'm a familiar face. I usually always forget to introduce myself, so the fact that I've remembered today is pretty good, since I actually forgot yesterday. Now, I'm also joined by a number of our presenters. You may have been watching their videos being released on demand. Today, I am joined by Nikhil Bora, Lucy Serret, and also Max Honner, Leona Zumbo, Ruth Herr, Charlii Parker, and also Zoe Haughton. Unfortunately, Eloise, Sam, and Michelle are unable to join us today, but we have talked to them and they are more than happy to actually take questions via the Slack channel. So we do have a A11y Slack channel. If you aren't part of that and would like to join, there is a link on the A11y website to our Slack channel where you can actually ask them questions or even chat about other presentations that have happened. We are also joined today by Paul and Kirk, who are our sign language interpreters. Nikhil will be using Auslan, and the interpreters will be translating sign into English for you and also vice versa. We also have our two captioners on the line, Eleanor and Jack as well. So we are really, really proud to say that A11y Camp is once again free this year, thanks to our generous sponsors. So I'd really love to give a shout out to our sponsors, our gold sponsors, Telstra and Intopia, our silver sponsors, ANZ and Coles, and our bronze sponsor, How2. All these organisations have been long-term sponsors of camp and have sponsored over many years. So I'm really, I'm really thankful for their continued trust and their support for the event, and also for digital accessibility and also the inclusive design as well. All right, so on to how the next hour is going to work. So there's going to be two ways that you can ask questions. The first way is via the Q&A feature. So in your Zoom controls, you will find a Q&A button. If you click on that button, it's going to open a Q&A window where you can type your question. Also in that window, if you actually see a question someone else has asked and think, yeah, I really love that question, you can also use the thumbs up icon to show that you're really, really interested in that question. That will just help me if there's a particular question that everyone wants to have asked. I'll obviously go to those ones first. Now, the second way you can ask questions is by voice. So at the moment, being a webinar, you are stuck on mute, unfortunately. But if you actually use the raise hand feature once again in the toolbar, so click on the raise hand, that will actually come through to me and I can see that you've raised your hand, and I can actually then allow you to go off mute and then ask your question verbally. When you do ask your question, if it's a question for a specific presenter or set of presenters. Let us know in either the Q&A or or verbally. If it's a question you actually would like to open up to the entire group, then just either let us know, or I'll assume that if it doesn't have a particular person that it's directed at. Do feel free also to use the chat. So if you do want to add your own comment, you can pop that into the chat. So I think that covers all the housekeeping. While you have a bit of a think of your questions and maybe enter them into your channel of choice, I might get everyone who is a presenter to do a very quick introduction of themselves. Let's start with you, Ruth.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm Ruth Herr. I work at Telstra as a UX researcher, and I've been doing a lot of work with Leona this year on testing inclusively with people with disability.
Lovely. Thank you, Ruth. And over to you, Leona.
Thanks, Sarah. So I'm part of a larger accessibility team at Telstra, and I'm an accessibility senior specialist there, and I oversee the accessibility of Telstra.com.
Lovely. Thanks, Leona. And Nikhil.
Hi, my name.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nikhil Bora. I'm deaf, and I'm the experienced designer at the ANZ. And I'm presenting today on helping you to create a deaf experience. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you, Nikhil. Charlii.
Hi everyone, I have lost my voice at the moment, so this is as good as we're going to get. I do apologise, but I'm still happy to take questions. I work for Intopia. I'm a digital accessibility consultant, and I also oversee Intopia Connect, which is the usability, accessibility side of Intopia. And my talk was on none of those things, but happy to take questions on that.
Thank you, Charlii. And I'm sorry for your voice. I forgot about that. Lucy and Max.
Hello, everybody. My name's Lucy Serret, and I'm a senior user experience design consultant at Melbourne digital consultancy called Transpire. Max and I did the talk on inclusive research.
Yes, and I'm Max. I'm a UX consultant at Transpire as well.
Lovely. And lastly, Zoe.
Hi everyone, I'm Zoe Haughton. I'm one of the digital accessibility consultants at Intopia. My presentation was on disabling buttons inclusively.
Lovely, thank you. So just checking in if anyone has a question. We haven't actually had any questions come through yet. I will be keeping my eye out for any through the Q&A feature or the raise hand. If you're having trouble with both of those, you can use chat. We'll get it some way. So I guess while we see whether we've got any questions coming through, I feel terrible, Charlii, because I was going to start with you. So Charlii, you shared your experience as someone who is neurodiverse and does have ADHD. And you gave us some really rich insights into what life is like for you. With maybe your experience both as someone who's neurodiverse and also in that digital accessibility space, what are some of the things that people can do when they are designing experiences to, make them easier for, say, someone with maybe ADHD?
I'm actually working on an article, and when I say working on an article, it may come out between now and 2025, but just on that topic, because while I was researching for my presentation, I was, I was focused a lot on ADHD and how things were affecting me and trying to be really mindful of that on a daily basis. And there were a couple of things that came up. One of the things, I was trying to download SVGs, I downloaded a number of driver update products, advertisements. Very rarely did I actually hit the download button for the SVG that I wanted, because when you go to those pages, and I've taken some screenshots which will come into my article that I may or may not publish one day, but it's surrounded by so many different download buttons, and then my brain has to try and work out which one is actually relevant. And I understand that that is a design pattern that, you know, these advertisers want you to click on their things, but as a person with ADHD who does sometimes have trouble distinguishing which is the right thing to click on, very, very frustrating. The second one, I was interacting with an Australian government website recently, and there was a button and it looked like a button, and I clicked it. It was to upload documents, and I clicked the button and the page kind of just lagged down a little bit, but it didn't really go anywhere. So I scrolled back up the page and I clicked the button again, and the page kind of lagged down a bit. And there was some text on the page, but I wasn't really taking any notice of what the text said because the button wasn't doing the thing that I expected it would do. So I did it probably between 5 and 8 times. And just as I was about to contact that department and say, I can't upload these documents because you've got a button that doesn't work, I did read the text, and the text was the next step of what I had to do. But because this was a button and I expected that the button would take me somewhere, not just drop down the page where the button was still in view and there was some text and then another button, I didn't actually comprehend what was happening on the page. So it took me a while, and I've done a screen recording of this happening, which again may or may turn up in the thing that I may or may not write. But that's another frustration. When things don't do what we expect them to do, we assume that it's broken or that we're failing at some way. So they're two things. And having sounds come on if you're opening multiple tabs or opening a tab and having sound come on. Another frustration, because as someone with ADHD, I have 50,000 thoughts running, and the internet is a wonderful place and I can look up all of those things all at once. But when I open a tab and it starts yelling at me, and out of the 85 tabs that I have open on my page, I don't know which one is actually making noise. It's very, very frustrating. So those are just a few things.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Charlii. So we have had a question come in. This one is for you, Zoe. So Kirsty has said that we've spent the last year or so working through the best way to handle the idea of disabling buttons and reached the conclusion you described. Is there anything else you can share with us to save us another year of work?
Wow, that sounds like a lot of pressure. Well, first of all, Kirsty, I'm really happy that you came to the conclusion of the presentation and found the presentation useful. I would say that the best way of ensuring that any design is accessible is to include people with disabilities in the whole process. So design your components with them. What I presented in the presentation is just a snippet, but the insights that you can get by relying on people like the end users with disabilities to inform your designs and test as well, can really ensure that the end product is not just accessible, but usable and a really pleasant experience for everybody. So yeah, I mean, in the presentation, which is available, there were some useful resources and articles at the end on extra kind of additions that you can take into consideration when you're designing buttons. Hopefully that's answered your question, Kirsty.
Lovely, thank you very much, Zoe. So Leona and Ruth, you have created a tactile interface to do some early usability testing. You obviously, you said a little bit about the experience of people and, some of the feedback that you got from, doing this. But I wondered, was there any further feedback from users about how they found it? And, what insights as researchers did this really sort of allow you to get that you haven't in the past?
I'm happy to go first with that. So it was a novel concept and a new way of doing things. So we certainly take on board some learnings about how perhaps we might refine it to make it easier for both the moderators and the participants. But the kinds of things that we learned were exactly what we would expect from testing with a prototype, and exactly like Zoe said, getting that feedback early and being able to really optimize the experience. So the purpose of the prototype was really to explain what was on the page and what its purpose was and what the purpose of each piece was. And then we could talk to the participants about the best way of having that rendered for screen readers. So it was, there's a lot of detail that we're going to incorporate into our designs, and we're very early on, so we've tested with 3 participants so far. We're sort of right in the middle of it, so we will definitely test with more, and then come back and validate those testings later on when we've got we've sort of refined the designs a bit more. But a lot of things like labeling, hierarchy, headings, things like that.
Can I add to that, Ruth?
Yes, please.
So the wonderful thing about this type of testing meant that these early stages of paper prototype testing were able to include people who are blind or people who had low vision and used screen readers in that part of testing to ask them the same sorts of questions. So it was just a more inclusive way to conduct that initial type of testing. So that was fantastic. As Ruth said, we could ask about labelling. Is this meaningful to you? What about this and that? And what's the difference between these two things? And the other fabulous thing was that we were able to include extra functionality to make our search more accessible. So, for example, we had a couple of participants say, look, I like to know how many items are on a page. And so often you'll have one of these drop downs that gives you information where you can filter by relevance, or you can filter by number of items that you want on a page. So we were able to include extra functionality early on in the process rather than having a whole thing built, run screen reader testing at that point, which is part of our current cadence, and then argue the fact that we want to add an extra component. Now it's much easier for us to change the design, put in the extra components, and then have that built. So it's been, a wonderful exercise for us at Telstra. It's been fun to be part of it.
Lovely. Thank you, Leona, and also Ruth. So Nikhil, you spoke about, you spoke about lots of different things, and I guess lots of different technologies and things to consider when creating deaf-friendly experiences. How would you suggest someone might go about advocating for some of those things that maybe you find that organisations aren't doing or aren't including in their designs to make those designs more inclusive?
Question good.
Question.
We start looking going. What is struggle?
It was a struggle in the past. Oh, you want my voice higher? Yeah. Sorry. Yep, that's better.
When we tried deaf.
When I was a child, being deaf, when I became deaf, lots of barriers I experienced.
Primary school with all hearing.
First of all, went to a primary school with all hearing people. All the children and communication was terrible. There was no sign.
I'm sorry, I'm just going to interrupt because Paul, I think it is, I'm very sorry. We're having trouble hearing you.
I'm happy to do the interpretation if you want to continue on, Nikhil.
Okay. That would be great, Paul. You're definitely coming through more clearly.
Okay.
Sorry, Nikhil.
Well, good. Okay,
so I'll repeat what I said again.
It's called.
I recall being at school, there were many barriers as a deaf person, particularly when it came to socializing with people who were not deaf who could hear, and I would use sign language. It's very different. So when I started to get involved with the deaf community, when I was at school, I realized I was not the only person that had this life experience. The person who was deaf, many other people had that. That inspired me, strengthened me, started to help me self-advocate. And my mother also gave me a lot of that inspiration because she was an advocate, being the first deaf school in a particular area, because she wanted me to have that equity of access to communication, education. Much time later in the workplace, I'm the only deaf person as a designer of accessible websites in the country. So every time I go to a meeting, often I found that I perhaps been pushed to the side or marginalized because it really comes down to communication in a meeting. So at that time, it was not ready for me. And when I see accessibility design really starting to blossom, I've said, look, we've got problems. I've got problems. And there's a long list of them. You need to make your information website accessible, more accessible to the deaf community. I understand this is not particular to the deaf community. It applies to people who are blind, people who are neurodiverse, and so on. But that's my experience. So I want to see deaf advocates inspired. I know that in the 21st century, a deaf advocacy organization lobbied Telstra and other telcos for a better SMS service, interoperability. I want to encourage other organizations to learn sign language, be able to communicate with people who are deaf, using in many different ways, because the government provided some assistance. So I encouraged organizations to make their services and websites deaf-friendly. That's my goal.
Today I have
so today I've assisted there are about 2 or 3 other deaf designers in the space, and I've worked for different corporates, and I'm pleased to see this happening.
Thank you very much, Nikhil. Before I go over to Lucy and Max, I actually want to maybe ask a follow-up question that I'll open up to any of the panel, but certainly Nikhil and Charlii, as maybe as people with lived experience of disability or neurodiversity, how have you seen, I guess, working with teams and the impact that has in maybe changing their perception of the need for inclusivity in, well, really everything we do, but of course also in that digital world? Charlii, I might start with you.
Sure, thank you. For me, my experience, and I touched on it in my presentation, where when I was first diagnosed with ADHD, I don't know that even I really believed that it was a thing. And it's only through knowing and understanding and a lot of people out there who have the I'm a bit ADHD too kind of thing, and certainly they might be. Certainly it could be something based on environmental, or they're just having a bad day. But a lot of people who it is just a bad day and they're just having an off day don't really understand the impact, and I didn't even understand the impact of on myself initially. So I've had different experiences in workplaces, especially having what's considered a something that's not obvious. So for me, sorry, my brain is stopping at the moment because the screen's switching around, and I'm having that little rabbit moment. Oh, bunny, squirrel. Apologies. So for me, I've had different experiences, and probably and I don't like to use the word discrimination, but people haven't really taken things seriously and quite often looked as an excuse. I am very, very lucky where I work now. I am very, very blessed where I work now because the entire team understand it's a thing, understand that I'm not always going to be on the ball. Sometimes I'll drop the ball and it's okay. And I think the best way is talking about it, especially when it's something that people are still getting their heads around, like ADHD, even people, the autistic community and other communities where it's still new knowledge that people are learning and getting their own heads around. To talk about it, normalize it, don't necessarily apologize for it, and just kind of be, this is who I am, and showing that there's more people out there like me. I've actually had a number of people reach out to me and say, thanks for your presentation. I feel, it's helped my journey and things like that. So that's been a really good outcome.
Let me take myself off mute. Thank you. Nikhil, did you have anything you would like to add?
Yes, I'll start with a design.
Yes, when I started work as a designer in a digital agency, there were many challenges and barriers I faced in open employment. I needed to share with my team to understand deafness, so they became deaf aware. For me, as a deaf person, lighting is key. I need to be able to see the person. They need to face me when I'm lip reading them. MS Teams, the chat function. But when I would send a response, sometimes I didn't have enough time. I wasn't getting enough support in the workplace. Over 10 years it took, was a long time. So I asked my line manager one day, is it possible to get a part-time in-house Auslan interpreter to support myself, to be able to go out, externally face clients, socialize, interact with the information in the workplace, rather than relying upon typing everything to people and hoping that people reply back to me. My line manager said yes. I got approval to be able to hire that person. So I was able to get a on-site, in Auslan interpreter, which empowered me and the team. I became much more confident, and really life became so much easier when I had the support in place.
Thank you, Nikhil. Lucy and Max.
Yeah, just backing off what Charlii said, I'm dyslexic. So I think for me, joining any workforce, it's about communicating my dyslexia up front, to be able to just be a bit transparent that I'm going to make spelling mistakes, or, essentially my brain for my dyslexia work is working twice as hard to understand the same information that someone who's neurotypical is trying to understand. So yeah, sort of making the team aware of that, but also just something that's happened to me in a workplace where we're talking about a meeting and I spelled something wrong. And I said, oh gosh, I'm so dyslexic. And someone in the room sort of made a comment. They said, oh, are you actually? And I said, yeah, I am. I've, been diagnosed since I was 8. And they said, well, thank you for sharing. But their daughter was dyslexic, and they found it really disheartening when people use dyslexia as an excuse for making a spelling mistake. And just sort of backing off what Charlie's saying, yeah, I think it's really amazing when people who have, a neurodiversity or whatever it is, being able to communicate or educate people on it. So we're not using these words in a way that could lessen someone's lived experience.
Absolutely. Were there any other of our panelists who would like to add anything to the conversation just before we move on? No? Okay. So Lucy and Max, Lucy, it's actually your second time at least presenting at A11y Camp. Last year, we talked more about the usability testing side, and this year is, more about that inclusive research side. So I was, I know a lot of organizations are even maybe struggling to even just get to that point of doing more usability testing with diverse users. And you're obviously pushing that boundary into the inclusive research side. how would you recommend that, or how would you go about convincing organizations around, taking those steps to, I guess, the ultimate nirvana, which is inclusive design, through the user research lens?
I might just sort of kick off, but Max, feel free to jump in at any point. I think it sort of comes back down to that original, the carrot or the stick approach when we think of accessibility and digital accessibility, like thinking about the benefits of having a really diverse team, and specifically talking about research teams. Some of the core, benefits obviously are that you have more diversity of thought within that team. This team is obviously responsible for designing research, which is really critical and quite interlinked to the types of outcomes that you might get from that research. It's really great in terms of mitigating bias in your team because, again, you have such a diversity of thought. The other core thing was, if we learned anything from the last 2 years of, especially working remotely and working in a pandemic, there's been a lot of accessibility challenges and also just a lot of anxiety in our environment at the moment. And so I think a lot of people are probably empathizing a little bit more with, different ways of working and empathizing more with maybe not sort of like giving more customizations to people. Like, maybe a 9 to 5 day a week work week is not sort of ideal for everybody. And maybe we need to be more flexible about the tools we use and the communication styles we have. And I think that contributes to that broader, fight for inclusion and fight for sort of diverse teams. So that's really thinking about the benefits of having a really diverse team and ensuring that you have people with disabilities as a part of your research team and people who are neurodiverse as a part of your research team. And then again, if we think of the stick, there are significant risks, and we sort of talked about that in the talk about you may have quite skewed outcomes or quite skewed insights because you've got a lot of people who potentially think the same, who are recruiting the same types of people over and over again, getting the same types of insights. And then that's when we start seeing that perpetual cycle where we're really only just designing and researching for a particular type of user. And the fact of the matter is that our users are really broad and really diverse, and we need to think inclusively with that.
And I think even to just put a capitalist spin on it, like if you're trying to convince an organization at the end of the day, if you're constantly using and testing with the same users and recruiting the same users, you are missing out on huge portions of society that are being missed because it's just not being considered. And there's a huge gaps in who you can be engaging with as customers at the end of the day, and people that can be using your product as well.
Absolutely. Following on from that, and I might actually open this up to the whole panel. So you mentioned about, recruiting the same type of users or that kind of thing. Often what I've found people struggle with is identifying who that they should be testing with, and that there's obviously the ideal of who we should be testing with, which, often could be everyone. But how have you gone about sort of, if you are doing a research study or that kind of thing, actually thinking through which people you want to actually talk to, and maybe what are some of those tensions that we often get of, look, I've only got time for X number of people, or I've only got budget for X number of people, or that kind of thing. How do you go about navigating that and, basically, thinking about who you might speak to?
I might just sort of kick that one off. Couple of things that come to mind. Acknowledging that it's just one test and that you're testing with a small sample of users. I guess when we're talking about this, I'm thinking more about a qualitative study, maybe a usability test, minimum 5 people, maybe up to 10 people. So acknowledging that it's just one test with a small sample of users, ensuring within that small test that you've got, you do have a mix, and we're not just talking about mix of people with different abilities. We're talking about location, gender, age groups, tech literacy. Like these are all really equally very important when we're thinking about recruitment. and ensuring we've got a nice diverse little set of different people that we're testing with, and ensuring that people with disabilities or neurodiversities are a part of that mix. And I think that's something that it can be a bit of a struggle. And what I've seen in the past is that people do accessibility testing specifically with people with disability and neurodiversity as like a separate type of study. What I think we need to move towards is actually including that more as a business as usual, including, and even with that, I know it's challenging because there's a lot of diversity within disability, you know, even when you were mentioning about, you know, dyslexia, there's a lot of different people's dyslexia is so incredibly diverse to the next person. And so you do want to have a bit of a split of that as well. So I think it's just about calling out, you know, we've got maybe one individual who's dyslexic who's a part of this test. The idea is that in our next research study, we're going to interview another person with dyslexia or another person. And I guess constantly seeing that as a continuum. It's not just a be all and end all test that we're going to find out all the answers. It's about really embedding that as a part of that business as usual sort of cycle of and way of working.
If I can just echo what Lucia said around diversity in the different types of disability groups. So, for example, someone who has a mobility impairment, we might have one participant that has tremors, and we might have another person that has a more severe, maybe they have cerebral palsy, for example, and they use a stylus. So we try and keep that diversity. We also try to make sure that we have different types of people use different types of assistive technologies. So we might have one person that uses JAWS with Edge, and somebody else might use NVDA with Chrome, for example. So we try and mix it up in that way as well. And the other point I wanted to make is even though you might have two people that are blind and use screen readers, one person that has low vision and somebody else that uses a stylus, for example, across the board, those people might rely heavily on a keyboard. And so we are testing keyboard accessibility. So there are some themes in there that come through as well.
Fantastic. Thanks, Leona. Over to you, Charlii.
Thanks, Sarah. Just following on from Lucy and Leona, I have a real passion around usability testing and testing with people with disabilities. And I think that what a lot of people forget is that they focus on the disability. So they'll say we need to do user testing with someone who is blind, but they don't look necessarily at the overall demographic of that person. They just want a person who's blind. Whereas you can actually include somebody who's blind in your general demographic, general user testing, and have them, you know, they might be the gender, the work, the income level, the interest level, all of those things, and also be blind and give you that point of view. And the other thing is people with multiple disabilities, you know, quite often people say, oh, we want someone who's blind. It's like, well, we can give you someone who's blind and has tremors and is hard of hearing. And you get a 3-for-1, and they have all of these life experiences that fit your demographic. So they're the other things. Don't always focus on the disability and the person's disability. Look at them as a person as a whole and what they bring to the table as far as their experience with disability on top of that.
Lovely, thank you. Anyone else just checking if anyone just raising your hand wants to add to that? No? Oh, good. So we have about 20 minutes. I know Chris has posted in the chat just saying if any of our attendees do have other questions, do feel free to drop them into the Q&A or raise your hand and ask them verbally. I will also ask our panelists as well. So because we have a little bit of a quiet group today, if any of you as presenters maybe watched each other's presentations and actually have a burning question for someone else, help me out here. I can keep making up questions as I go, but if you have maybe a question for someone else on the panel, do let me know. Okay, so maybe back to you, Zoe. So you talked about a pattern, I guess, that, you know, that whole disabling a button, particularly until someone has filled out a form successfully is a pattern that we see, you know, we see a lot, to be honest. And, you know, we've always had accessibility concerns about that particular pattern. How do you think we can get on the, I guess, the front foot, let's say, for some of these patterns that end up sort of, you know, suddenly coming out and becoming the established pattern, but obviously, you know, sometimes they do have accessibility concerns and, you know, we see that through usability testing, but at the end of the day, it's something we, you know, sort of need to communicate and to maybe influence before these patterns get established. Have you got any tips or ideas for how we might go about that?
Yeah, I suppose going back to the beginning, obviously you want to start addressing accessibility, you know, at the design stage as early as possible. So the whole shift left approach. So that can kind of mitigate and preempt problems that could occur down the line. But I would say also, in answer to Kirsty's question, that one way that you can kind of reduce a lot of the accessibility issues that we do see with components is by first of all using native components where possible. It often has like accessibility built in. So you've got your keyboard accessibility, it's going to announce the role, it's going to announce state automatically. And those are often accessibility issues and barriers that we come across a lot in our usability testing, and in people with disabilities that they kind of have to find fixes to and workarounds. So I would say that where HTML isn't possible for whatever reason, if you have a custom control, then you need to be using ARIA in a way that supplements HTML, but in an accessible way. So you always want to be communicating what a control is, what its state is, have a very clear, simple, concise name. I mean, these are just basics. These are the building blocks of accessible components. And I think if you get those right, and those can be issues that can be kind of ironed out right at the beginning before you even code, and that can prevent a lot of problems further down the line.
Lovely, thank you very much for that. So a question has just come in. Any tips for recruiting people with disability for testing? For example, do you contact customers or use online tools? I think this one is open to anyone, so pop your hand up if you would like to answer. And everyone's answering. Leona, let's start with you.
I was going to say we use Intopia and they're fantastic. So it's just a call out to Intopia and how good they are. Charlie's laughing on the call as well. They're very helpful to you also in refining your demographic, but have a huge database of people that are very interested and willing to be part of user testing. So we've just had a really wonderful experience with them.
Thank you very much, Leona. Charlii, I might pass to you as the person who runs that and does send recruitment.
So yeah, I coordinate Utopia Connect, and that is a large database of people with disabilities. So yes, anyone can reach out to us, but there's also different groups as well. So if there's a particular disability group that you're finding you really want to run past, have a contact them, have a chat. The important thing is, and the useful thing about using something like Utopia Connect is that we have spoken to the people, we've vetted them, and we've also got experience in testing with people with disability. Just today we had we were testing remotely with somebody in New Zealand who is hard of hearing, not deaf, but hard of hearing to the point where she wasn't able to hear over the microphone. So we ran the entire session over chat and it worked really, really well. So it's being able to contact and get the right people and also have some disability etiquette. Some people are a bit concerned about the extra overheads or the extra things that you have to do, or what to say, what not to say, and things like that. So contact organisations, also look into disability etiquette, talk to the individual person, find out about their preferred language, their preferred terms, their preferred pronouns, which is another big thing in the community as well. So there's a lot of different things around it, but just be confident and aware in yourself about running these sessions, and get in contact with Intopia Connect or a similar organisation or a disability community as well.
Lovely, thank you, Charlie. Over to you, Nikhil.
Yeah, we have lists from.
We have a list, for example, from Vision Australia.
Not only by the
not only for people who are blind, but with various disabilities. It's interesting to have that list as a resource. If you're interested to testing, you can also register with Vision Australia. Depending on what type of disability you have, any issues with being online, you can register your interest there. And secondly, networking. So, for example, I'm on the train and I see people who are struggling maybe with their phone. They have physical disability or problem with a joint. I'll ask them, are you interested in being involved in some testing? I work at the ANZ Bank. We'd like to improve our product and functionality. And a lot of people said yes. So use everyday life experiences when you're seeing everyday life people. So everyday experiences, everyday people struggling with everyday tasks. And I present my business card to them and ask them, please contact me because we'd love to hear from you. Want you to come in, use our phone or tablet apps for testing purposes. Yeah, and I find that networking is more powerful when you see people in their home setting or in public space navigating these technologies.
Fantastic. You're very opportunistic there, Nikhil. All right. So we've actually had another question come through from Teresa. Teresa is asking, do you find moderated qualitative testing, for example, interviews that are face-to-face or online, more valuable than quantitative testing, such as questionnaires or online unmoderated testing, when testing with people with disability? Or do both actually have a place and have their merits? I'll open this up to everyone if anyone would like to answer. Yes, Lucy?
I think that, I have a personal preference for moderated testing whenever I can, just because I love having a chat. But I think this is probably more of a question that would have to come down to the research plan. Like, what is the goal of the research? What are you intending to find out? And I think this kind of question has a lot to do with when, in reference to people with disabilities, it's about...
Just going to stop you for Max. Could you move slightly closer to the microphone?
Is that better?
Get in there.
There we go. Put your head in the screen. We'll be fine.
I guess what I was just saying is I think it has more to do with what information you're trying to find out. What's the purpose of the research? What's the goal that you're trying to achieve, the objectives that you're trying to get to? And that will often sort of help articulate what type of testing is best for you. That's probably the best way I'd look at it. I'd stop looking at the people you're testing with and take a step back and try and look at the research. What's the goal of the research?
Lovely, thank you. Did anyone else have anything to add on the qualitative versus quantitative approach to user research?
I might just jump in there quickly, Sarah, just about, I guess with both methods, you do need to consider about the accessibility of both. So just even in some of these examples, obviously, if you're doing some face-to-face interviews, you need to be thinking about what's the accessibility of the physical building? What about instructions of how to get to that place for that person? Is there an accessible mode of transport, or how would they even be getting to that session? Again, with remote, making sure that you're using a tool that's got, captions, or even what we found in our research is asking people what video conferencing tool do they prefer. Different people mention, different things. I think, Nikhil, you're talking about Microsoft Teams. I know a lot of people prefer Teams. They've got a lot of really good features. I've heard the captions are a lot better with Microsoft Teams. So again, putting that question back to the user and giving them the choice. When we think of questionnaires or surveys, just making sure that that tool that you're using is accessible to screen readers, and ensuring that the question design as well is really clear and not using jargon. So there's a number of things that you need to do for, I guess, making sure that those tools are accessible. Again, I would go back to, this shouldn't be, again, something that is an extra step when we're doing with people with disabilities. We should try to bake that in as a business as usual, to ensure that experience for both people with disabilities or people who don't identify with a disability is as, I guess, as paritative as possible to ensure inclusion.
Fantastic. And yep, Clarissa's just popped a comment in the chat area. I think that just to follow on from that, particularly around maybe usability testing and qualitative versus quantitative, one of the things that I've definitely found is that if it's unmoderated, obviously, sometimes, if a user finds a barrier, that's usually it, and you can't sort of test the rest of the task. Often when I've done moderated usability testing, I can sort of guide that person past that sticking point to then get, some quite valuable feedback about the rest of the process. And so it's probably it's up to the individual to maybe determine if that's a failure of the task or not. Usually if we're pretty confident that the user wouldn't have been able to move past that on their own, it would be still considered a failure, but we still get that lovely qualitative feedback, as well. And it just sort of probably gets us a little bit more out of the session. So I've got a little bit of a bias towards moderated, but sometimes unmoderated is all that maybe an organization can do. And there's definitely something is better than nothing, I think, around this. So we've got one more question, and then we're nearly at 3 o'clock. So a small question for Leona and Ruth. Excuse me. Any specific reason you tested the desktop design rather than the mobile design by using the tactile diagrams?
Well, one thing is that the labels, particularly the Braille labels, take up quite a lot of space. So we did want to be able to include all of the important features on the page. We also synchronized with testing that was happening on a website prototype as well. So we wanted to conduct the testing in sequence. But absolutely, something to look at. I think the mobile design would be really interesting to test as well. And we do normally test desktop and mobile prototypes, often in separate sections, to make sure that both work well. Leona, did you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, to your point, you said that we run through our standard cadence to test the live site t.com, and we do treat them as separate sessions. So we'll do like one session with say 5 to 8 people on desktop, and then the next month we might test the exactly same test plan but on a mobile device, but with a different bunch of people, but similar demographics. So I think this is the first time for us that we did this. So we just decided to start with desktop because it was a little bit easier, and get some learnings from that, treat it as a pilot, and then apply that again and test on mobile. But it's a nice idea actually to test it on mobile, because when someone's running their fingers over the tactile elements and we're describing them as we go along, it's almost as if it's like Explore by Touch, which is voiceover on an iOS device, or TalkBack on Android. And so we were able to sort of simulate a similar experience, where you can tell where the elements are within the context of each other, and get some feedback from participants in that way. That's good.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much. I think that actually brings us to the end of our day 2 live Q&A. So can I thank all you wonderful presenters for both the time you put in to your presentation and also joining us today for our Q&A. So thank you for that. And also for our attendees as well who have signed on to have a chat. We will put this live Q&A up on YouTube as well, so other people can join in and listen to what we've discussed in the last hour. I'd also like to once again give a bit of a shout out to our sponsors, Telstra, Intopia, ANZ, Coles, and also How2. Thank you very much. Thank you to our sign language interpreters as well as our captioners for doing a great job. And I might see you tomorrow at our 3rd Q&A, same time, same place. Tomorrow's theme is actually development and testing. So we'll be getting a little bit more technical and having lots of fun with it. Thank you all. See you later.
A11y Camp 2021.